WBNE.
Hello, and welcome to episode 71, all about Two Towers, Theatrical Edition, Part 1, being the 71st part of That's What I'm Tolkien About. Hello, my name is Mary Clay. If that's too complicated for you, just call me MC, and today I'm joined by John Negroni of Cinemaholics. Welcome, John.
Hey, Mary Clay, so excited to talk about the Chronicles of Narnia with you.
That may come at another time.
You're laughing?
Who knows?
Oh, no. What did I watch?
Oh, no. Did you watch? I know it can be kind of confusing. A lot of people confuse the Prince Caspian movie and Two Towers because they both have walking trees.
And there's towers, and there's high fantasy. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very easy mistake to make. Yeah. No, today we are here to talk about Two Towers, Theatrical Edition. I'm so excited to talk about it because I felt like I was going a little crazy talking ad nauseum about Fellowship of the Ring for a month, and just as I was like getting a little bit sick of it, it was time to move on to Two Towers. So
sick of it? I can't even imagine that. Is it just because you were watching it in chunks? And because I could imagine wanting more.
I was watching it many times because last month I was also on Bacon and Eggs for 3 weeks in a row to cover
I've heard of it.
each of the movies. You know, I was watching Fellowship of the Ring in depth, and then I was also having to watch all of the movies again. And then I also had to watch I say I had to, you know,
you were required legally, I'm pretty sure.
Yes, it's in my tax statements actually. That it's a required, financial requirement for me. Yeah,
I'm sure you wanted to as well, right? At least
yeah.
bit.
So I say I had to, like it was torture. No. I watched the extended edition, and in order to figure out what was different from the extended edition, I synced up theatrical and extended on two different screens, and then I would pause the theatrical.
What?
Listener John just made a terrified.
You were
face
just doing it for the
that.
pod. So much dedication. I would just be like, sorry, no, everyone, you're just gonna have to figure out the differences for yourselves. Like, this isn't class.
See, I've gotten very intense comments about theatrical versus extended, so I couldn't just, leave it untouched. But why don't you tell me before we jump into the conversation, what is your history or experience with Lord of the Rings?
I will tell you, and you know what? I was just talking about this with none other than Tyler Carlin on the Bacon and Eggs Discord.
I'm familiar with him.
Yeah, he's all right. No, so I read Lord of the Rings before I watched the movies not because I was cool like that, but because when the movies came out, I didn't get to see them in theaters. I was like the perfect age for it too. Like I was 10 years old when Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone came out, and then a month later when the Fellowship of the Ring came out, and I was like, these look cool. And my parents were like, sorry, we're not going to take you to see this movie. We don't care about fantasy. And I was really upset about that. But when I was in middle school, I had a summer reading list, and it included all the Lord of the Rings books. And that same summer, not only did I read all 3 books, I also got to watch Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone secretly, because I had also not read the books even. So that's my history. I watched it, and I didn't watch the movies until eventually, out of nowhere, my mom, like after Two Towers came out, was like, these movies are amazing. Everyone I know loves them. And then she bought the DVDs. But then even still, I did get to see Return of the King with my friends in theaters. Because at that point I was like 13, and I was like, walking out of the house being like, see you later, Mom. I'm going to go watch the new Lord of the Rings movie. There's nothing you can do about it.
That's like really awesome though that you at least got that. Because that's something that I am going to be sad about, is that I didn't get that experience of watching the movies in the theaters. And honestly, they need to do more screenings of the Lord of the Rings movies.
Why don't they?
There's always in Richmond at the Bird Theater, they always show the Harry Potter movies all the time, and they have, screenings and drive-in theaters, or like they need to be doing where are the Lord of the Rings screenings?
Maybe because it's so long, because our drive-ins, they show like Indiana Jones, but they don't show like the really long movies.
Well, I don't know. Well, one of the drive-ins near me, I say near, it's like out in a county, like 40 minutes out in the middle of nowhere.
I think I know the one you're talking about because I've been to it. It's where I saw Monsters University.
They've been doing like double features where they should, and that, a double feature of 2 normal movies is the length of one Return of the King. So
it's 2 towers, so 2 movies. There you go.
What? Yeah. So like, why? So it does make me sad that I didn't get that experience. And I also am like similarly bummed out that I came onto the Harry Potter craze well into, I think it was maybe the 5th movie or the 6th movie.
If
At
it's
that
5th
point, I
movie,
had
that's better than me because I came in at Half-Blood Prince. So
I think I came in between those.
I see. Yeah, because there's 2 of the last ones. So then I'm thinking book.
Oh no, yeah, no, I mean movies because I wanted nothing to do. I thought I was really cool because I wanted nothing to do with the Harry Potter books. Everyone was like, you gotta read these, and I'm like, no thanks, I'm gonna sit over here with my series of unfortunate events.
You could be popular. Sorry, Golden Compass and me have got this little weekend planned out.
So I missed out on the midnight premieres for the Harry Potter movies and the like Borders midnight releases for the books, and it makes me sad. But something that doesn't make me sad is this movie.
Yeah.
Particularly, this is going to be a very unpopular opinion, but I think this first 45 minutes is my favorite part of this movie.
What?
Maybe the middle section, but I have some intense feelings about Helm's Deep because it completely throws off how they structured the movie. And so because of that, there were a lot of changes from the books that I disagree with viscerally.
The beginning's nothing but setup. It's all setup.
So the thing is that I could watch like 7 hours of Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn just running around the New Zealand countryside chasing orcs.
That's pretty cool. There's some good shots and some good flexes with that camera with them, especially with Gimli like collapsing. It's pretty funny stuff.
Yeah. Also, real quick, I want to timestamp this episode in case like we say something that is later proved insanely wrong or is just wildly inappropriate for the time or whatever. We are recording this episode on, what is today, November 4th. It is 9 p.m. EST, and I believe we are still waiting for Nevada to be counted. Mm-hmm. So at this point in time, we don't know who the president is. We have a feeling, but we don't know. So hopefully you, listener, next week listening to this are, you know, in more of a definitive state of the country than we are currently. But
hopefully people weren't tuning into us for like live election results and you're disappointed.
You're going to be very much disappointed. Yeah, so Two Towers. We are covering the first, I say 45 minutes. I believe it's 40. I don't remember the exact timestamp, but it was
46 minutes and 52 seconds.
Yes. This is hopefully, listeners, so that the conversations I have with my guests are more manageable because I totally divided up Fellowship of the Ring into, like, I did it wrong and I should have divided it up more into smaller chunks. So I'm hoping that by doing 45 minutes, it's better. We'll see. It's all an experiment, basically, that I'm figuring out. And then by the time I have something nailed down, I'll be done with the movies.
Impressive. Is there like a name of this segment? Because I tried to workshop some ones. My first one and my favorite is definitely like Rohan, what you doing? Just that. My other one is a play on the lone Rohandur, and it needs some work. I know that's the case.
Those are great. I think that's a great way to summarize this section of the movie. Yeah.
Gandalf the what?
He doesn't even know, you know, because he's like Gandalf.
He forgets his name. Well, we'll get to that.
That sounds familiar. What up? It's Mary Clay from the future here with this week's movie summary. I did a Twitter poll that said that you guys like these, so here we go. Previously on The Fellowship of the Ring, the gang escapes Moria safely as Gandalf falls to his death fighting a Balrog. We see him grab his sword and catch up to slay the beast, except for Frodo wakes up and it was all a dream. Or was it? Sam and Frodo, to the surprise of no one, are lost as they wander around trying to get to Mordor. Enter Gollum, a character so well done that you will cringe every time he's on screen. After some emotional manipulation on all sides, Gollum agrees to help them get to Mordor, and Frodo ignores every sign that this is a bad idea. Meanwhile, the Uruk-hai still have Merry and Pippin. But what's that smell? Man flesh? Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli are gaining on their trail. What's the Golden Trio been up to since we last saw them? Well, Aragorn's listening to the earth, Gimli's insisting that dwarves are very robust and threatening people, and Legolas is being an ominous elf. So, just the usual. Legolas looks into the distance and sees that they're taking the hobbits to Isengard! In Isengard, Saruman is hard at work breeding more orcs, chopping down trees, and encouraging his followers to burn villages in Rohan. Just an average Tuesday for Donald Trump, a one-term president. In Rohan, everything is fine, or at least that's what Wormtongue tells Theoden. Éomer and Éowyn explain to their uncle that Theodred, his son, and their cousin is dying. Theoden, who has been corrupted by Saruman via Wormtongue, has no idea what's happening around him. Just in case you're wondering if Wormtongue is a bad guy, he banishes Éomer and stalks Éowyn. So yeah, he's very obviously a bad guy. There's infighting with the Uruk-hai over whether to keep the hobbits alive or eat them, but looks like meat's back on the menu, boys! Never mind what a menu is. Suddenly, the Rohirrim interrupt their cannibalism and a battle ensues. Merry and Pippin try to escape when suddenly a horse tramples Pippin and kills him! I mean, not really, but can you imagine what a dark choice to make 25 minutes in? The Golden Trio run into the riders of Rohan and they have a calm conversation. Just kidding. Éomer threatens Gimli, Legolas threatens Éomer, the Rohirrim almost kill all of them, but eventually they talk it out and learn that they killed all of the orcs and didn't see any hobbits. The trio investigate the burning pile of orcs and assume the worst after finding one of the hobbits' belts. Aragorn goes into Strider mode and retraces their path to find that they escaped into Fangorn Forest. By the way, did you know that when Aragorn kicks the helmet, Viggo Mortenson actually broke his toes, and that's the take that they kept in the movie? In Fangorn Forest, Merry and Pippin climb a tree to escape an orc still chasing them. Suddenly, the tree comes to life and saves them. Oh, sorry, he's no tree, he's an Ent, and his name is Treebeard. And he's taking them to see the White Wizard. Oh no, there's only one White Wizard, and it's definitely Saruman. Just as things are getting good, with a collective sigh, we cut back to Frodo, Sam, and Gollum, still around on their way to Mordor. They pass through the dead marshes. Gollum rescues Frodo after he is entranced by a body in the water. Frodo becomes obsessed with the ring and begins to form a connection with Gollum, which all goes over really well with Sam. And then they scramble to hide from the ring wraiths passing by, despite the elven cloaks on their backs that they'll use in about 15 minutes. The Golden Trio is back on Merry and Pippin's trail in Fangorn Forest and prepare themselves to fight the White Wizard. They are literally no match for him and get blown back immediately, but lucky for them, it's actually Gandalf. In a flashback, we see that Gandalf defeated the Balrog, and due to some obscure wizard god magic, he came back as Gandalf the White. His first act as Gandalf the White was scoring a really dope horse named Shadowfax, who comes running in slow motion through the fields like an erotic period drama. The gang heads off to help Rohan, where they will surely be met with open arms. So it opens up with beautiful scenery again, once more, of New Zealand, and we have like a legit previously on the Lord of the Rings moment. I don't know, I thought it was weird. I understand why they did it. It was to remind the viewer, if you're coming in and into the theater and you hadn't seen Fellowship of the Ring, that Gandalf died fighting this Balrog, and it shows the whole sequence again. I want to bring up something that I forgot to talk about during the Fellowship of the Ring episode on Gandalf's death. When he says, "Fly, you fools," there's a fan theory that was him telling them that they should take the eagles and fly to Mordor.
I disagree with that theory with every fiber of my being.
Yeah.
No. I do not understand. Sauron controls the skies. They're sitting ducks on the eagles. They would have died. They wouldn't have made it.
There's multiple reasons why it wouldn't have worked. You know, one thing is that, like, they can't, for the same reason they can't let, you know, Aragorn or the elves or Gandalf have the ring. It's, you know, the eagles are also these fantastical beasts. I don't know, and where to find them.
I don't know where to find them. Clearly Gandalf knows, though.
So, like, they can't have the ring because they're very powerful and it could corrupt them. And then also the whole thing is stealth. They have to be, the only reason it ends up working is because of the distraction with the battle at the Black Gate.
Exactly. So, the ring race, like, could kill the eagles. Like, if they had the element of surprise, yeah. I don't want to gloss over it, but I personally really like the opening because it is a nice transition, like just when like we're over the mountain a bit, and you just hear the voiceover. They don't just like jump you right into it. It like sets the mood. It kind of slowly brings you to it. And it kind of reminds me of like anime in a way, because a lot of animes will open this way where they take you right to the scene that happened in the episode right before, but then it continues that scene a little bit. A good example is probably like One Piece. I love One Piece. And that happens a lot. Like they just kick you off like maybe 2 minutes before the episode ended last time, but then they don't really stop. They just kind of keep going sometimes. And that's kind of what they do here, right?
It shows a little bit of what happens after Gandalf falls, shows him fighting and everything. And then it's revealed that it's Frodo, Frodo is waking up. So I guess, obviously we know that actually did happen. And Gandalf did have this battle because he comes back and he defeats the Balrog and talks about that later on. But, this is kind of, Frodo's imagining of what happened, and maybe his subconscious being like, so? Maybe he did survive.
I always took it as like he's waking up and maybe he had a vague version of that dream, but we, the audience, saw something that he didn't see. Because is there any point in the books or the movies where it's suggested that he has any sort of like prophetic like eye into other events outside of his own understanding?
Unfortunately, I can't remember specifically. I think the hobbits have a couple dreams kind of like that when they are in the house of Tom Bombadil in the book. I feel like something else happened.
If that's the case, that's a fun nod.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I agree with you that like as you're watching, you're like, oh, we get to see Gandalf's side of what happened.
Right.
But if we're going by the rules of what they set up in the scene of like, oh, this is Frodo's dream.
Right.
Then it's like, well, Frodo couldn't have known what happened after Gandalf fell. So I just assumed like, oh, I guess that's him imagining it. But, the reality is that it's just the producers and directors, whoever makes those decisions, script writers, whatever, giving that bit of foreshadowing that like Gandalf maybe did survive. Who knows? Frodo wakes up and, he's with Sam and they're on their own and they're traveling in circles. They're lost. As they are sleeping, Gollum approaches them and starts, filthy little thieves, they stole it from us. And so previously on That's What I'm Talking About. No, during the Fellowship of the Ring episodes, I was not kind to the special effects and the CGI, because watching it in 2020 for the first time it's very jarring because not all of the special effects are good still. However, Gollum is really good and it still holds up really well 20 years later. It's really amazing how, because this was like the things that they did with Gollum and Andy Serkis, the actor / voice actor or whatever for Gollum, are all very foundational for a lot of special effects and everything in movies for the 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super influential, and obviously it's what really brought Circus to like another level. I personally believe that this Gollum intro, everything about it, from the visuals to the writing to the choreography and like how his character comes across, if this movie did not nail that, and him in general, I do not think this movie and Return of the King work. Like, I think they would just be totally underclassed, especially compared to the first movie. But I think Gollum, he's a secret weapon, because every time he's on screen, to me, that's when I'm the most invested.
Yeah. And it's also, so I say this with love because it's a compliment, but everything with Gollum in it, I hate. It's so well done. And I just have this level of unease whenever he's on the screen. The voice he uses, the way he looks, it's gross. And then the way that he, is clearly addicted to the ring and is just trying to, do whatever it takes to get it back. It's unsettling, but it's so well done that, yeah, I agree. If they hadn't done this well, it would have been like, we don't have to worry about this part of the movie with Gollum because he's nothing to worry about, but he is 100%.
And as the audience, you don't have to sit there and be like, how could they possibly, well, not they, really Frodo, how could Frodo possibly, keep him around and do all of this? And it's like, he needs him. Like, without Gollum, like, as the audience, we know that they'll never make it to their destination. And so there is this sort of like devil's bargain that just makes their part of the story so fraught and so different and interesting, because elsewhere people are, there's sword fights and political intrigue. But with these characters, it's about stealth and it's about manipulation. And it's fascinating to see that juxtaposed. And I also have to say, I think that in this opening scene, where like Gollum is like creeping up on them. I read somewhere that Andy Serkis was like basing it off of like heroin addicts. And you really get that vibe, like that whole dissension. Oh, it's scary.
Yeah. And honestly, there were so many scenes. I think there's one particular scene later on in Two Towers. Honestly, everything is all blending together. It's just one 9-hour movie at this point in my brain. Andy Serkis is fantastic in this.
Yeah.
And, like, where is his Oscar? Let's go back 17 years ago. The like energy that he put into this role is so intense. So he would drink what he called Gollum juice, which was a mixture of honey, lemon, and ginger to keep his vocal cords from being fried, basically. And apparently he was also like one of his hobbies is rock climbing, and so he used that, for crawling around on all fours. So you can just tell how invested he was in this role.
Yeah.
And it really pays off. It really works well. Frodo and Sam are wandering around. They're very lost. Gollum shows up, and there's a moment where it's the first of several moments throughout this and Return of the King where the theme and idea of mercy comes into play. And he has a moment where he can kill Gollum and decides not to. And that ends up being a very important move on their part.
It's such a cool moment. I never picked up on it before, but on this watch, I do sort of feel like it's mercy built out of pride, where Frodo, it's like because he has the leg up on Gollum, it's like a combination of pity and like overconfidence in his control of the situation, which I had never really noticed that before, but that's another character flaw of Frodo's.
Yeah, I totally see that, because he when he holds the sword up, he says, "This is Sting. You've seen it before." And it's like very almost like braggadocious.
Chill out, dude. You don't know how to use that thing. Don't.
And then we cut to, this was the scene where I was like, I go from first an appreciation of Gollum, like I've already gushed about, on to like, oh my God, get him off the screen, which is when they have the rope around him. And if you didn't watch the extended edition, you're like, I don't get it. It's just rope. What's up with this? But this is elven rope that Galadriel gave to Sam when they left Lothlorien. And so because of that, that's something that I'm not sure would come across to just movie watchers if they don't have that context from the books. But the reason Gollum is screaming about it burning him is because it's, elven magic. It's good magic. And he can't stand that because he's been so corrupted by the ring. And he's just like shrieking and screaming, and like Sam or Frodo is like, this isn't gonna work. This is supposed to be a stealth mission.
Every orc in Mordor is gonna hear us with that racket.
Yeah, exactly that.
Sam.
Yeah.
It's Sam, the audience surrogate.
And truthfully, so many times where it's like, Frodo, what reason do you have to not believe Sam in this moment? Like, he's your best bud. You need to listen to him. But whatever. That will come. More conversations about that will come later on. And they agree to, this is like the first moment of manipulation, really, that you see with Gollum, where he gets them to take the rope off and like pledges his allegiance basically to Frodo, and promises to serve him as his master, and all that gross stuff. Sam doesn't have a good feeling about it, of course, and
it only gets worse.
Yeah, it only gets worse. Yeah, but they have to forge onward. Yeah. So then we cut back to what is my favorite part of this movie. We see orcs running in a giant herd, and Merry and Pippin. And unfortunately, now I say unfortunately, it's my like favorite thing I've seen now. There's a video that was created like a year ago, and it kind of went viral again this time. And then the guy who made it did another one of orcs with normal voices.
Oh my gosh, I gotta see this.
I will send you the link to it because I can't unhear it. And the scene, so this scene is, I think, the first video that he made. And it's literally, it's like,
what do you smell? Man flesh.
That's glorious. Oh, can I say real quick? This is, in Two Towers, this is my favorite Merry and Pippin that we get in all three movies. Like, I know people really like what happens with at least Pippin in the third movie, but man, in this movie, they're so fun, and like they're little like escaping the orcs, the underdogs. There's like some comedy relief. I love them. They're so great.
Yeah, I also, when I was reading this part of Two Towers, I also liked reading their chapters the most, especially because they're mostly with Treebeard. And Treebeard is one of my favorite parts.
Yes, I love the Ents.
Speaking of Merry and Pippin, another thing that they did for like forced perspective and stuff to make the hobbits look smaller. So when Merry and Pippin are on the backs of the orcs, they were being carried by two stuntmen who had like oversized costumes on, and then they also made these like giant false heads to put on the stuntmen. You know, obviously they would look enormous compared to Merry and Pippin.
You can kind of tell too, and it makes sense why they zoom up all the way to their faces whenever they're shown on screen. Like, I'm literally watching it right now, and it's like, it's obvious when you know that, but it's movie magic.
Yeah, so I just I like hearing about all of the different things that they had to do, since, you know, 4 of your main characters are smaller, 5 when you include Gimli are smaller than the rest of the people. You have to do a lot, and it's a lot of work to put in, aside from just, you know, CGIing every single scene.
Yeah, you just can't take shortcuts, Hobbit.
So I just like, you know, hearing all of the practical effects that went into stuff like this. Oh, also another practical effect I want to share. So the orc's blood is black. I guess designers and makeup people were like, oh, it would be kind of weird if you see them talking and screaming and they have pink mouths. So they gave to the orc actors before all of their scenes licorice mouthwash for them to swish around in their mouths.
I'd hate to be in their shoes. Ugh.
Yeah, I was like, that's disgusting. I mean, it's really smart, but that's disgusting.
Yeah, it's smart if you're the director, but
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so the orcs are like, they're gaining on us. What do you smell? Man flesh. And they and they pick up the speed, and Merry and Pippin have this moment of like, oh my God, they're coming for us. It's a very like sweet moment, honestly, of like, they're near, they're gonna save us.
They're so innocent.
And Pippin rips off the brooch on his cloak with his mouth to leave as a clue.
Very smart. People are always like, Pippin's so dumb. Pippin's not that. He just puts up a front. He's goofy. He's fun-loving and naive, but he's not dumb.
I don't know. I think this is maybe the one smart thing he does in the whole
fair.
series.
That has been a while since...
Like, he peaked in this moment.
He peaked. He ran out of... that's the only nat 20 that he rolls.
Yeah. I can't remember if it's him or Merry at the end of Two Towers that convinces Treebeard to take them the other direction. But he doesn't have too many smart moments.
I vaguely remember him like helping with that. I think you're right though that Pip or Merry institutes it or concert.
Starts. So, but this is one of his few smart moments. And then we cut to, it's my favorite thing ever. We cut to Aragorn, and he has his ears pressed against the ground, and he's listening to it.
Very strong Avatar vibes, you know, like everything is connected.
Yeah, you see him in his full, as I call it, ranger mode, where he is in his element. He is loving this of like, all right, we get to track some orcs. I get to use all of those skills that I've been honing my entire life. It all comes to this moment. Yeah, and he's listening to the earth, and he says like, they're quickening their pace and blah, blah, blah. I just, like, Legolas comes in, and then you see Gimli's like barely keeping up with them.
What bedrock can tell.
And this was when I was just like, I love this part of the movie. It's like my favorite part of the story.
Fun.
And
yeah, it's a lot of energy, a lot of like adventurous swashbuckling journey stuff.
I love all of his like ranger stuff. It's like very intense, but it's great. It's great. Yeah, and Gimli has a great moment. They've really like pushed him in this movie and moving forward more into a comedic relief role, which I understand because they're not with the hobbits anymore whenever you're showing their part of the story. Until we get to Return of the King, it's just them, and there's very little that's funny about Theoden being possessed by Saruman and Wormtongue and Helm's Deep. So
and it makes sense for Gimli's character arc because I think the first movie does really well to focus on his legacy and his comrades who have been killed. But then the next two movies are about him finding that new family with Legolas and Aragorn. And that comedic relief really helps. Like, it really sells like the love and affection they have for each other. It's beautiful because, I mean, like, we really see like these, especially Legolas and Gimli, develop like a genuine camaraderie that wasn't there in the first movie because that's before they go through all this peril together. And I gotta say, Gimli is a trooper. Like, he is like keeping up. He's not loving it, but he's still doing it because he loves these hobbits. And I love Gimli so much.
Yeah, he says, we dwarves are not made for cross country. Sprinting is where and then he says we're very dangerous over short distances.
Yeah.
And then at one point, Legolas is like, I see something happening over there. And Aragorn says, what do your elf eyes see? And of course he says, the iconic, they're taking the hobbits to Isengard.
Yeah. And many a YouTube video was born.
They're taking the hobbits to Isengard. They're taking the hobbits to Isengard. They're taking the hobbits to Isengard. God.
Oh, it's so good. Chef's
Orlando
kiss.
Bloom, he's a mensch. I think that he really understands what this movie did for him, and I think a lot of it has to do with like I think the Pirates of the Caribbean success also kind of humbled him a little, and I think that he's not the most developed character in these movies, as cool as he is, but I don't know if you've already had that conversation.
Well, first, I just want to say there was a really like sweet and comforting video that Orlando Bloom did. Today is still Wednesday. Election
Is it?
Day. It literally feels like it's been a week since election day, which was just yesterday. Anyway, I woke up yesterday to a message from one of my friends, and she sent me this video that Orlando Bloom did on Instagram of him saying like, I know that you feel like your vote doesn't matter and this is such a heavy burden and it's a hard task. And it got me thinking, and it feels very much like Frodo having to go to Mordor and destroy the ring, and it's hard, but what you do can make a huge difference, and the smallest person can make a difference in the world. And I like this was at 9:30 in the morning, I'm lying in bed and already a ball of anxiety, and I was like, am I about to start crying already?
Because that's so inspiring, and I will admit that was definitely very present in the front of my mind as I was watching this, and I was like, a story about fighting against insurmountable odds and a long journey that's going to take hours and hours to see the conclusion of. I wonder if that's relatable.
So he says they're taking the hobbits to Isengard, and then we cut to Isengard. And we see Saruman, and he's saying that his orcs and Saruman's forces are going to join up as a union of the two towers. And it's like, oh, there's the name drop. I still am adamant that Two Towers is just a terrible name for the book and the movie because it's barely about the towers.
But it sounds cool.
Kind of about Orthanc in Isengard, and everyone's like, oh well, the other tower is Barad-dûr or Minas Morgul, and I'm like, okay, but those don't really come into play until Return of the King. There are no, and the other thing is that there are more than two towers in this world. There are many towers.
Well, that's why I always wondered if it's like just trying to reference the victory over the two towers in this, right? Like, and if it's like if Tolkien was trying to get to the idea that this victory that the Ents have is way more consequential than the flashy Helm's deep sequence, but because of the movies, it doesn't really come across that way. You know, like it's still epic, but it's not like the centerpiece of the movie.
Exactly. So that, I mean, that being said, I don't know what else I would have named it if I was Tolkien. So
Helm's Deep. Yeah, it doesn't have the same ring.
we see the orcs cutting down more trees, and it's like foreshadowing. And Saruman says, I had to go back. I went back and rewound it to make sure I heard it correctly, because I was like, that sounds a little too on the nose. He says, the old world will burn in the fire of industry. And it's just so on the nose for Tolkien's themes in the books of nature versus, man versus nature, or society and industrialization versus nature.
Yeah, and World War II, like the using of industry to like burn our resources in order to like inflict war on other human beings.
Yeah. We see more orcs being birthed. It's very gross.
Reminds me of the Matrix a little bit. I kind of forgot about it.
and then we see Saruman instigating a lot of unrest. And this is something that I do like, that you get to see this, because in the books, you don't see Saruman at all until you only hear about what he's done from Gandalf when they're in the Council of Elrond. And he's like, oh yeah, he turned and he locked me up for a couple weeks and I had to escape, and it was a whole thing. And then you don't see him until he's been defeated by the Ents. So I do like that you get to see his part of the story, and you see him there. He is like riling up this group of people whose, I guess, land or homes have been stolen by Rohan, I think is what
the horse lords.
saying.
I think it's implied that they like seized a lot of territory, or like they probably inflict a bunch of taxes on what I assume are like maybe bandits, or like maybe like vagabonds and stuff. And the thought I had, again, context, I was like, well, if this took place in the modern day, all you would have to use is Facebook, and you'd basically do the same thing here.
So he tells them, he's like, go burn every village, take back what is yours. And we see this just like, everyday village reacting to this. And this mother sends her 2 young children off to let the king of Rohan know that this is happening, which is a very big weight, I should say, to put on the backs of these 2 children.
But look, that's why I think this is one of the most important scenes in the entire movie, and I stand by it. Because first of all, it is like I don't want to say metaphor, but it is like an amalgamation of like what this entire story is about, putting that responsibility on the next generation and the seemingly powerless. And also just showing like what the stakes are, because it would be so easy, Hobbit, for you to just sort of like assume the audience knows what the stakes are, but by showing this village being devastated, it's very efficient storytelling, because then you get that across fast and then you move on.
I mean, if you're just coming at it from the perspective of the books, you're only seeing these events through the eyes of the main characters, through the eyes of the people who have the most power in this situation. So having this scene where you see this village being burned and this mother like sending her children off, and then later on with Helm's Deep, you see all the refugees and Rohan hiding and everything. You see that everyday person and how their lives are being so vastly affected. The things that Saruman and the things that Sauron are doing isn't just affecting Frodo and the Ents and Rohan. It's affecting the entire land and every person.
It's so
except
hard.
for the Shire, apparently, in the movies, but whatever. We'll get to that in Return of the King. So then we have this introduction of Rohan, and we're now in Rohan, and I love everything about Rohan. All the scenes, it's great. Oh, it's so good. The writers of Rohan are coming back in, and they're holding up this one dude who looks like he's about to die. Then we have Éowyn rushing in, and this is something
My queen.
It was something that once I noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it. Her sleeves in this movie and the other movie, they're massive.
Oh yeah,
like you could clothe a full child in just the fabric of her sleeves.
Just per sleeve is one child.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, and so she rushes in, and Éomer, her brother, is there, and they're watching over their cousin who's dying, Theodred.
Carl Urban in the house, by the way.
Oh yeah.
So great.
I really love him as Éomer. It's
His
so
wig.
great.
I swoon over it. I have like a slight criticism of like not a criticism. It's just when you watch these movies as like a 13-year-old or 12-year-old, it's so hard to keep these characters straight.
Oh, I don't
because
blame
then
you.
like Faramir shows up later, and I'm just like, who? Wasn't that the guy who because they do it so fast, like introducing everybody. It's a lot easier when you read the books, but yeah, even after reading the books, I was kind of confused.
No, I'm totally with you there because that was something. So for your context, John, I watched Fellowship of the Ring. The first time I watched it was 4 years ago for a film class. Never seen it, never read the books, never knew anything about Lord of the Rings until then. And I'm watching it and I'm like, I don't know who these people are. Like, there's so many characters. I was like, I think that one's Gandalf because he looks like Dumbledore. And
And
then
your professor was like, one day you will do a podcast about these movies and books.
And then reading the books, last year reading the books, I couldn't for the life of me remember what Aragorn or Boromir looked like, because in my mind they were the same person, because I was just like, yeah, they were the two white dudes that were normal sized, that weren't Gandalf or Orlando Bloom in that movie. Yeah, they just kind of blended together. So literally
when I rewatched these movies a few years ago, I watched them while looking at a map. Because I was like, I just want to understand like where everything is. And that was actually super helpful.
A fun fact that I learned. So just before Legolas says they're taking the hobbits to Isengard, he says something about like they're turning northeast. If they were turning northeast, they would be heading in the wrong direction.
Plot hole. You just got.
Just saying. Anyway, the only reason that like I know that this character is Éomer, and the only reason I know this dead body character is Theodred, is because I read the books. I would have zero idea who they are in reference to each other.
I mean, like they try. Like Grima's sort of like, Éomer, son of
Éomer. Yeah.
There's lip service, but I mean, compare it to like when you see Grima Wormtongue, you're like, I think he's evil. I can't put my finger on it. But
pretty sure he's not good.
Yeah, maybe Slytherin. I don't know.
But it is it's interesting here because you see the things that happen in Rohan with Theoden before we get to them in the books. Because when Gandalf comes back and he meets up with Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli again, and then they go to Rohan, all of these things have already happened. So it's really interesting to get to see that happening before your eyes of like, his son Theodred is dying. Theoden is... I love the use when they cut to... So you go into his... I don't know what it's called. His like throne room castle.
Something like that.
I love how it's so dark in there and it feels so... claustrophobic.
Lots of shadows.
Yeah, lots of shadows. Almost like there's a literal shadow hanging over Theoden. And yeah, we see Wormtongue come in. He's nasty looking. Theoden is also nasty looking. He's very old and decrepit. His eyes are very glassy and fogged over. It's really effective the way that they have portrayed the influence that Saruman and Wormtongue are having over him.
Yeah, and they don't explain it very well. Like they don't really like get into any of that exposition, which is wise. But yeah, it's a unique problem they have because this scene obviously is not chronological with everything we just watched. Like it's not really possible to like have the banishment and then him getting the company and already being this far away from Rohan, and because like it cuts to that scene pretty soon. But there's not really much they could have done. If they had tried to put this earlier in the movie, it would have felt really jarring. And if they put it any later, that obviously wouldn't work. So yeah, there's not much they could do there.
Yeah, Éomer is like, we have to do something. Saruman's coming up, our land, like this isn't a good situation. And Wormtongue yells at him and is like, who are you to betray your king or whatever? You are banished. And this is something that I'm a bad podcast host and I should have gone back in the book and checked. I'm not sure that actually happens in the book. I think when the writers run into Aragorn, they're just out in the land, like protecting it and surveying it, and they just run into him. I don't think they're banished in the books. I think that's just a movie thing.
That could be consolidating a little bit because it wouldn't make sense that there were writers of Rohan still affiliated with the king before, any of the Éomer stuff happens.
Yeah. And then there's also this shot of Wormtongue looking at Éowyn as she is leaving. And this is an addition to the movie, is that I'm not mad about it because it's really effective and it works. And like in that sense, I really like it. But in the other sense, I really hate it because of what the change is. And it's like, it's this implication that Wormtongue is like sexually harassing or assaulting Éowyn this whole time. Or at least he's very predatorial.
Yeah.
Is that a word? Over her, and it's it's just another drop in the bucket. Is that a phrase? of like, Wormtongue is not a good guy, folks.
Yeah, they really rub the salt in that. You could really make the argument it's not necessary. I guess part of it too is
it's not at all.
Yeah, I think though maybe they also want to add more stakes to it or make it seem like she's in danger, even though she's sort of like ancillary to all the drama with him. So I'm not 100% sure what they were going for, but agreed, it's icky. I don't like it.
Yeah, icky is a great word to describe it, yes. So then we cut back to the orcs, Aragorn, and he makes this comment that like, oh, this is not normal for these orcs. They are moving fast. They're in the daylight. This isn't good. And we see them take a break at night and they drop Merry and Pippin and they're arguing over they're hungry and all they've had is maggoty bread. And then they get into a fight and one orc kills another and then says, "Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys."
I could just eat their legs. They don't need them. I'd love to hear that in the normal voice.
It looks like meat's back on our menu, boy. No way. God, finally.
Also, the hobbits' legs are tiny. That's not going to feed. There's so many orcs.
Yeah.
These hobbit legs
that's not
going to
stave off their appetites.
But this is, of course, the like, how do the orcs know what a menu is? They don't know what a menu is.
Maybe they have little orc taverns,
Maybe, yeah. My follow-up question is also, so they say, looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. Do the orcs have a concept for what gender is? Or at least the Uruk-hai?
If you're going by Lord of the Rings, I don't think so. I don't know, because obviously like Elder Scrolls has gender within orcs, so I'm not sure if Tolkien ever had that in mind. I have no idea.
Yeah, because it, at least with the Uruk-hai, it appears that Saruman uses his magic to make them. So it doesn't look like there are females for breeding in the movie world. I think that actually there's a very gross history that they go into in the books of that. So it looks like, okay, it doesn't look like there are any female orcs. So I'm like, do they know what boys are? Interesting. Anyway.
Maybe they have like an orc preschool, it's like, this is what the humans, they have menus, they have boys and girls, who knows?
That's all you need to know, kids.
yeah, it's a very quick class.
And then right as Merry and Pippin are talking about like, there's just, another like sweet, sad little moment between them. Merry says, I think we made a mistake leaving the Shire. And it's just one of those things of like, wow, what an understatement, boys. Luckily, they get saved. Or actually, we don't know yet. Ooh, we're kind of left on a cliffhanger here. The Riders of Rohan come in and battle these orcs. It's a miracle that Merry and Pippin aren't just trampled because they're so tiny and there's so many horses.
But they kind of use that to their advantage, that they're so small and nimble. But yeah, in this scene in particular, it is sort of implied that they get trampled.
Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh no, yeah, it cuts away right as I think Pippin is about to be hit by trampled by a horse, and you're like, oh no, what's gonna happen? And it cuts to Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn again, and Legolas comes in again with another ominous elf moment. He has many of them.
Oh, they're perfect.
A red sun rises. Blood has been spilt this night.
I would just be at that point. I'd be like, dude, coffee doesn't exist in this universe, so I'm gonna need you to shut up. Too early.
Apparently, to get this shot, this like dawn, as the sun is rising, whatever in the background, Viggo Mortenson persuaded the second unit team to camp out on location. And his efforts in organizing this overnight campout were so effective that actors and crew from the other film units, including Miranda Otto, who plays Éowyn, joined in for this little campout. And I love that.
Very cool. Yeah, people don't appreciate how extraordinarily difficult it is to film a movie during either like the morning twilight, or not the twilight, I forget what it's called, in the very beginning of the day, but then also like the golden hour and like dusk, and like capturing that exact lighting that's why movies that do it really well, like Denis Villeneuve is amazing at it, like with films like Sicario, and his cinematographer, I'm blanking out, Roger Deakins. Oh my goodness, they're so good at doing that sort of thing. So every time I see it in any movie, I get a little bit giddy.
Yeah, it was very well done. So good job, Viggo Mortensen, getting that little camp
Great
out
job.
going.
Very nice.
I should also mention that during filming all of these scenes where the three of them are just running and they're doing these, helicopter shots of them running through the scenery, Orlando Bloom, Viggo Mortensen, and Gimli's stunt double, what's his name, Brett Beatty, they were all injured during this.
Whoa.
Orlando Bloom had broken ribs. Viggo Mortensen had broken a toe, which we will talk about in just a second. And
Jeez Louise, were they like...
Brett Beatty had a knee injury. So I was like, oh, these poor guys.
Yeah, how did that happen? Is it because they have all this stuff on them and it's just hard to run properly on these hillsides?
Well, they didn't have these injuries from running. They had like gotten them beforehand.
I see.
But I just love hearing all these stories behind the scenes of all of the actors' like dedication to the movie.
Yeah, and, like the pain and fatigue comes through on their faces.
Yeah. The Riders of Rohan go past them, and then they realize that, oh, they're not the enemy, that's Rohan. And Aragorn calls out to them, and they circle them. In this moment, you see that Aragorn has dirty, sweaty, mangy hair. He's very dirty. And then next to him is Legolas, who looks perfect.
Pristine, just stepped out of the salon. I have to say, this whole scene, this like the way they write in and like get surround them. I keep bringing it up, but it reminds me so much of like a Dungeons and Dragons scenario I've seen so many times. Where it's like, all right, roll for persuasion, like because they're in a very tricky situation here, and it could have ended in a fight very easily, but obviously like that wouldn't have been good. So
it is very tricky, because at first Aragorn is like, oh, these guys are on our side, but the Riders of Rohan are very cautious, because they think that everyone is under the influence of Saruman now, and they've been banished. And there's a whole thing where Gimli almost gets his head cut off. And Legolas immediately... Éomer says, like, I would, like, my sword would chop off your head if it were a foot higher, dwarf. And Legolas does not hesitate, pulls out his bow and arrow, whips it out.
He's a full-on Gimli stan at this point, and I don't blame him. But you see it. You see how, like, what they've just gone through. It hasn't been a lot of time necessarily over the course of, like, the movies and the books and everything, but it has been enough experience. Even just them like running together over the last several days, like, yeah, they're like becoming BFFs.
Yeah, and I love it. Oh, you love to see it. They ask the riders, we're chasing these orcs. They had these two hobbits with us, and they're like, oh, orcs, we just defeated a bunch of them last night and burned them all to a crisp.
None alive. Were
none
you
of
friends
them
with any of them?
I hope not.
Bye, take these horses later.
Yeah, they give them two horses, and I thought it was hilarious. They conveniently have one white horse that they give to Legolas, because all of the elves
this matches your costume.
White horses. Exactly, yeah. They're like, we don't want to ruin your aesthetic. Here you go. Here's our one white horse. Yeah, so they ride over to this pile of orcs, of smoldering orc bodies. And
it's one of their wee belts.
They pull out of the pile and see one of the belts that the hobbits had been wearing, and they're like, oh, they're dead. And then Aragorn, out of frustration, kicks a helmet. And listeners, this is going to be this week's segment of Is Viggo Mortensen Actually a Ranger? So when Aragorn, listeners, you may or may not know, I say that because this fun fact is like a meme in and of itself. When Aragorn kicks the helmet next to the orc pyre, he actually broke 2 toes. And this is the take that appeared in the final cut. Peter Jackson was impressed with the scream that Viggo Mortensen gave out, and was later, when he learned that he was injured, so impressed that he continued to act, and then was surprised to learn later on that Viggo Mortensen actually broke 2 of his toes here.
That has to be a hard helmet, because he's wearing like decent shoes there, right?
Yeah, which makes me it makes me question, like, did they not make like a prop helmet that was like lightweight for him to kick?
Or just like lighter weight.
I guess not,
Yeah.
because they Peter Jackson talks in behind the scenes feature about how like we were getting all of these takes and he was just getting better and better each take. So clearly he had been doing it, multiple times.
Yeah, it was an improv.
Yeah, and then this last take, he let out such a guttural scream, and Peter Jackson was like, "That's it, good job." And then later on was like, "No, I broke 2 toes."
Wow.
So
I hope it was worth it.
And then in the extras, when Viggo Mortenson was talking about this, he says that like, oh, well, the only reason, this fact or whatever got out about me breaking my toes because I'm an actor and the actors don't usually get hurt. We should really be giving the like love and attention to stunt crew and stunt actors because they're the ones who they go through much worse than we do and they push onward anyway, and the credit goes to them. And I just love that little addition to this factoid because Viggo Mortenson is so humble and trying to give a lot more credit to people who often go unnoticed in the film world.
Very based Viggo Mortenson. I appreciate that.
And that concludes this week's segment of Is Viggo Mortenson Actually a Ranger?
Yeah. Tune in next week for Does Viggo Mortenson really like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because of its treatment of stuntmen? Stay tuned.
Yeah, so he kicks a helmet, breaks a toe, sad.
Then he does really cool ranger stuff right after, just saying.
Yes, he becomes like Sherlock Aragorn, and he's like, a hobbit was lying here on the grass, and he starts slowly piecing together what happened as it cuts back and forth between showing what happened with Merry and Pippin.
Very cool, like, filmmaking here. It's like really engaging, and there's so much cleverness in these early scenes compared to, like, I don't know, what's another Peter Jackson movie? Hobbit. Sorry, just keep harping on that.
And they're like, oh no, they went into Fangorn Forest. Rip. That's not good.
Very, very good, like, quick way of being like, who would go in there? And it's like, sure, like, you don't really know why it's dangerous, but we're about to find out.
And so it cuts back and shows Merry and Pippin running into the forest. And they're like, oh, I think we escaped. Nope, there's still one more orc coming after them. And they're like, oh, quick, we have to hide. And this is where I get very mad because later on in this movie is a very ridiculous scene where Frodo uses his cloak to cover up Sam and they just miraculously turn into a rock and they hide from an orc that is like 10 feet from them and should have seen them. And that is the only time they use these magical camouflage elf cloaks. And so moments like these when they're like,
does it
hide.
work when they don't have the pin thing?
The little brooch?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Is there something magical about that? Or...
I don't think so, no, because I think it's the material itself.
Oh, okay.
So this is where I'm just like, okay, if we're going to give them these magic cloaks that can make them turn into a rock, they need to use it at any other point when they have to hide. So... Well,
maybe they were just under pressure and they forgot, and climbing trees seems like a safer bet. I will cover up for these plot holes left and right.
So they start climbing a tree and an orc jumps up and pulls Merry down. Pippin is like, no, Merry, no. And then the tree he's holding on to blinks and opens its eyes.
It's like a fun double take. It's like you can imagine the blinking meme guy.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. And I really like this reveal of Treebeard. He saves Merry from the orc, and Treebeard is like, tiny orcs, who are you? I don't trust you at all. Blah. And Merry and Pippin are very afraid, and they think they're gonna get killed. And yeah, I love Treebeard. I love him. They're like, oh, the tree talks. And he goes, tree? I'm no tree. And that being said, though, I don't know how people in theaters were able to understand what he was saying without subtitles on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I don't know either, because I always had the subtitles on, especially with this movie. Like, you need it. Like, everyone's name sounds the same.
Exactly,
He's so cool in this scene, though. He's just like...
Treebeard is voiced by... I didn't know this until, like, a couple hours ago. Treebeard is voiced by John Rhys Davies, who plays Gimli. And I was like, what a random like, did they just forget to cast Treebeard? And they're like, oh shoot, who's on set today that's not really doing anything? Hey, John, come over here.
Well, I wonder if they tried to find somebody else, and then maybe had Rhys Davies like read the part or something. And I could see Peter Jackson liking it so much and not being able to accept any other version of it, you know? Like, that's one theory I have, but I don't know. I don't know the details there.
I know. I just think it's I don't know. It's just like so random and weird that like he would have, you know, two parts in this movie.
We should call him. Set the record straight. Hold on.
So yeah, let me call him up real quick. Apparently Treebeard's voice was made. There weren't like any special effects added to it. It was just John Rhys Davies speaking in the lowest possible register of his voice through a wooden megaphone. Which I don't know what a wooden megaphone looks like, but apparently that's what they use.
Look, I'm somebody who's watched Dave the Barbarian from the Disney Channel, so I can picture that pretty well. The only problem is that I also see a squirrel tied to the top of it. I have a feeling exactly 0 people will know what the heck I'm talking about right now.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, that is the
that's so
next.
funny.
Once you're done with all the Tolkien stuff, call me up because we got
Dave the Barbarian.
Yeah, I want to rewatch every episode of that show.
Perfect. Dave the Barbarian.
Huge but a wimp, I think is the
Huge but a wimp.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so Treebeard is not trusting of the hobbits. He says, I'm going to take you to the White Wizard. And we're like, oh no, the White Wizard.
I know who that is. And I know they were on the way to Isengard. That could only mean.
And he throws him down at the feet of a White Wizard. I don't know who it is. We'll have to wait a couple minutes to find out. But it is like a nice little, you know, obviously we know, rewatching it or having read the books, you know that is Gandalf.
Right.
So I like how they did this reveal because it's very, you know, it's very tricky what they did. It was like a nice little fake out because because they show him from the back, it actually looks like Saruman.
Right. Yeah, it works pretty well for this narrative purpose, but I don't think I ever didn't know who that was. Like even watching the movie for the first time, because I think even then, like I remember the books. So, but still, imagine being like a super casual viewer. You've only seen the first movie. That must have been really cool, like a really big moment. Like later when he like comes into focus, it's like what?
Yeah, that's something that because even reading the book, you know, there were very few things that I knew about as I was reading the books, but I knew that Gandalf was going to come back at some point. When I read that part of the book, I was very surprised actually because I had zero idea that it was going to happen then. So it was like a nice little surprise. But I wonder what it was like for people watching these movies for the first time. You know, back in 2002, it was Two Towers. Yeah, 1 year after 9/11, Two Towers comes out. Whoops.
Yeah, I kind of remember people like bringing that up, but I think it did get spun into like a patriotism thing. It's like we can enjoy these movies and not let the terrorists win. I vaguely remember that being sort of the thing. The
narrative, yeah, they're going with. Yeah, so I wonder, because, you know, also at the time when these movies were coming out, it's not like people knew, except for people who had read the books, which are very dense. You know, it's not like Harry Potter, Harry Potter, everyone read before going to see the movies. Everyone knew it was going to happen. I bet very few people read the books while watching these movies.
Kind of like Game of Thrones, like in the early days, right? And I did know Lord of the Rings was becoming a big thing eventually when Lizzie McGuire made a reference to it. When that happened, I was like, whoa, this isn't just nerd stuff anymore. This is, I mean, it's still pretty nerdy stuff, but.
Lizzie McGuire, that's funny.
Figure it out on the way.
Well, it's also funny because there's someone in the writer's room at Brooklyn Nine-Nine who is a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I think it was maybe season 3. Several episodes in a row had multiple Lord of the Rings references to it. It's really remarkable. That's something that, you know, it's been dead for, or I say it's been dead. The movies came out 20 years ago, you know, and the Hobbit movies that came out much later weren't that good. And it's not like this thing has a massive theme park that keeps everything alive and the franchise alive. And sure, we have the Amazon Prime series coming up, but like, it's just, you know, it's very prolific still. So that's like really impressive for the series.
I'd also say the video games have been pretty, like one of the reasons I
need
rewatched the
to play
movies
those.
was Shadow of Mordor, the sequel coming out.
Oh,
Really
and I
good.
also, so in a very like roundabout way, I got my hands on a PS3 so that I could watch my family's Blu-ray copies of the Lord of the Rings Extended Edition box set. It's the only reason I got a PS3, so I could watch Blu-ray discs. But now that I have it,
Yeah, slippery slope.
I could probably, because are the Lord of the Rings games on PS? I don't know what.
I think Shadow of Mordor might be on PS3 as well, but I'm pretty sure the sequel is only PS4. Pretty sure.
Well, that's fine. Some of the earlier games or older games, maybe I
Yeah.
could get like secondhand or something. Ooh, because that's something I didn't think of. Because I've heard a lot of people bring up the games before, and I'm like, oh, that sounds really fun, but I don't have a PlayStation, so I'll probably just never, I'll never be able to play those games. That's fine, whatever. But now that I have one,
Yeah, evil, maniacal hand gestures.
exactly, yeah. So then we cut back to Sam and Frodo and Gollum. And this is where I don't know how you feel, but I couldn't help but like let out a groan and a sigh of like, ugh. But like we were making such progress with the other plot line. Like that was going great.
It does feel a little bit like of an interruption. Also, I call this the missed opportunity scene. I'll get to that.
Oh, interesting.
Little tease.
So they are approaching the dead marshes, which are very well done in the movie. They do a very good job of like setting the scene of like this is a very gross, ominous place to be right now, and there are all of these bodies floating and looking up.
So cool.
It's very creepy, very good.
One of my favorite production design elements of like the whole movie, second one.
So while watching it for the first time, I was with a friend and she was like Snapchatting my reactions to certain stuff. And she was recording my reaction to this part. It was like as Frodo is staring at one of the bodies and then it cuts back and forth a couple times. And I say like, oh, it's probably, I was like, oh, it's going to open its eyes, kind of joking. And then like half a second later, it opened its eyes and I was like, oh, I called it. I think it would be great if his eyes open. Oh, what? Did I not just say?
This is like one of the first of many times, right, where like Gollum does like creepy exposition and like there's something about the way he gets it across that's so engaging. Like I can't help but be so fascinated by the story here just because of the way that like Andy Serkis tells it, and I want to like learn more about like what is this battle that happened so long ago. And
it's also a very creepy subject, because he's talking about this huge battle and all these people that died here. So, it's creepy no matter who would be telling it.
this is why I call it missed opportunity, the scene.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
This scene serves two important purposes, right? The first one is to show what Gollum brings to the table. It's the first instance we show of like why he's a good resource for getting to Mordor. It's because he knows these shortcuts. He's able to explain that some more. And so when it happens later in the movie, it doesn't come out of nowhere. So that all works pretty well. And it's a fun scene because it lends some danger and makes their journey more interesting. The second purpose to this scene that I think is really important is that it starts Frodo on the path of trusting Gollum too much, because Gollum saves him and he misconstrues that because he doesn't really see that it's the ring that Gollum actually cares about. All that's great, right? It's like, yeah, good scene. But the reason I call it missed opportunity to scene is because something that happens in the third movie, in the third book, you have this entire section with all of these ghosts, right? And you have all of these spirits, and they could set it up so easy for them to be the army that saves everybody in the final battle. But instead, in the third movie, it's just like this.
It's a whole separate other dead army.
But you could totally just like move that story into this dead marshes area, and then you get to come back here. Then you get to have Aragorn and them just like survive the marshes, and you get some closure to this area, and then it feels even more of a payoff. Just saying, that's my little.
No, that's really no. That's a great because it's like criticism for the Army of the Dead in Return of the King is that it's very random, and it's that way as well in the book. Aragorn, he like goes and sits by himself and looks into the Palantir and is like, I had a revelation. We have to go do this very creepy thing, and a lot of us might die on the way to it. And then the army of the dead wakes up and saves the day. It's very, last minute Deus Ex Machina thing, and it feels, if I didn't know that was in the book, I would just think that was the writers making up something, you know. And then it's also funny you bring that up, because watching, so Frodo is entranced by one of the bodies and he like just falls in. As he's underwater, the like ghosts come up, and it looks very similar. It almost was like they were testing out what they wanted to do with the army of the dead in this scene, because it looks very similar to the army of the dead.
Well, didn't they film it back to back? So they could have planned that?
Not necessarily like the filming of it, but the special effects people having to go in and decide like, okay, what are we going to do with the army of the dead? I know, we'll make a mock-up version of one or two of these like ghost creepy dead things underwater, and we'll see how that looks. So I just thought it was interesting that like they look so similar, and I would have tried to make them look different. So it's really interesting that you bring up this idea of like they should have come back to the marshes. Aragorn should have come back here, and this should be the army that he awakens.
Right.
Honestly, that's a criticism I would give for Tolkien. That's what Tolkien should have written from the beginning, you know?
Well, I give Tolkien a lot of slack, but I would say like that is an advantage that the movie can have. It's like all these years later, you could see these opportunities to sort of improve upon the original. And I see it as a missed opportunity, because it really would be such a cool moment for, based on what we hear, this is a combination of two armies. This is orcs, elves, and men. So you could have had it like raise just the men and the elves, or even if you did raise the orcs too, I don't think that would really work. But if you had them like fighting together, and that thematically is really resonant too, because then it's showing like, unification that is resonant of the past, like coming back to save the day again. And I'll stop. It's all right. It's fine. And the third movie's so great.
No. It's all great. Gollum and Sam get him out of there, whatever. And then as Frodo is sleeping that night, it shows him like stroking the ring, and you see that he is like very quickly having like the same addiction to it that Gollum has. And it's so great how they do this scene of, it shows him with the ring and being entranced by it, and then over his shoulder, Gollum starts like talking and being Gollum and creepy and gross. And Frodo wakes up and hears Gollum say, "My precious." And he's like, "What did you call it?" And this like realization in Frodo of like, oh, I'm not that different from Gollum right now.
Yeah, he sees the Hobbit in him.
Mm-hmm. They form this connection, is what is starting to be formed. And Frodo starts to have some empathy for him and says like, you used to be a hobbit once, didn't you? Smeagol. And it's so cool what they do, and it's such a good choice what they decided to do with the like animation of Gollum when he's going between Gollum and Smeagol. As Frodo is asking him about, Smeagol and kind of reminding him of his old life, you see his eyes like brighten up, and they look a lot more human, and his pupils are not as dilated, and he looks, his eyes look very kind, honestly.
He's more downbeaten too. Like he's not as fidgety. He's a little, you can sort of feel control over him as the audience that you didn't before. And it's a really good magic trick through animation.
Mm-hmm. So that's just, kind of setting the stage of Gollum having these, two personalities, and Frodo starting to form this connection to him that will be very problematic.
Yeah. He's a problematic fave, that Gollum.
Yes. And then the Nazgul come, and it's another instance where they're like, quick, hide. Let's not use our magic elf cloaks. Let's hide under this bush instead.
Oh, boy.
And as the Nazgul are flying around, Frodo reaches for the ring and this is a moment from the book, and I love that they pulled it directly from the book and used it here. Sam grabs Frodo's hand and holds his hand so that he can't reach for the ring in this moment.
What a good buddy. What a best friend.
It's a good moment.
Because he's so scared in that moment too, you know, like Sean Astin does such a good job showing it. And like, you see that like his like love for Frodo, like completely triumphs over his fear. And this is like not one of the first instances of it, but it's like a progression of like those little steps he's taking to eventually, when that moment, the moment in the third movie with him comes, we feel it. We feel it like really earned at that point.
Yeah,
little moments
exactly.
like this.
And then we cut back to my favorite people again.
We're back to the fun part.
Yes. Let's see. So Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli are now in Fangorn Forest. They're still looking for Merry and Pippin. This is something that was cut from the movie it like hurts my soul because it's such a great Legolas Gimli plotline in the book. Legolas has this, because he's from Mirkwood, he has this deep love of the trees and forests. In the movie, you get this impression that like he's very like afraid of it, but in the book, he's like, no, they're trees. They're my friends, and I love them.
That sounds kind of nice.
And he's a tree boy and he loves it.
He's a
and
tree
Gimli meanwhile is like, no, these are evil trees, and they
I
have
like
this,
rocks.
yeah. It starts this argument between them of like, what is the most beautiful place in Middle Earth? And Gimli brings up something called the Glittering Caves. They say like, well, if we live through all of this, I'll go with you to the Glittering Caves if you come with me to Mirkwood. And they're like, deal. And it's this little Legolas and Gimli road trip subplot that is so wholesome.
Happens off screen, but maybe in the credits we get to see like some Polaroids.
Post-credit scene.
Like, that'd be pretty nice.
Yeah, we do kind of get a little bit of that in this scene with Legolas talking about how the forest is feeling. And he says like, it's angry. He says, this forest is old, very old. Could we not have used a better word?
We've got more adjectives in the book, dude. Like,
very old, whatever. But yeah, he's explaining what's happening with the forest and setting up that like the forest is hurt and hurting because of what Saruman and the orcs are doing.
I guess you could call it enmity. I'll be here all hour.
Another comedic moment from Gimli, because he like lifts his axe up and Aragorn's like, Gimli, put your axe down, and he kind of freezes for a second.
And he's like contemplates it.
And puts his axe down.
Very loyal though, like he listened, but yeah, it's such good acting because he's just like so like whoa, you know, like looking around.
And then Legolas says that the white wizard approaches, and they do a lot of close-ups of each of their faces and their eyes in particular. We get a great shot of Legolas's elf eyes, and Aragorn says like, be prepared, like do not let him speak because he will cast a spell on us. And they all prepare their weapons, and there's this one shot that is so questionable and I wonder why it was necessary, and it's a close-up of Legolas pulling the arrow into like knocking it into the string of his bow, but Orlando Bloom like rubs his fingers through the feathers on the arrow, and it's like in slow motion, and it's a little sexual, and I don't know why they did that.
I didn't read it that way. I read it as like, okay, all right, man, why am I defending Legolas so much this thing? Okay.
No, it's okay. I love him.
I just think what he's doing there, it's not that he's like rubbing it for no reason. I just see it's like, okay, this is a guy who's been doing this for a super long time. I see it as this sort of like, that's how he sort of like games himself up. It's like the kind of thing where you sort of like tip your nose before you do something, or like you kind of,
okay.
I just see it as like a little quirk, you know, of like how he's such a good shot. Like you could see him having like superstitious, like if I don't do this before I do my shot, then it's not going to land. Okay, I'm done.
Okay.
Apologetics over.
No, a quirk. I think that's a good way to explain it. I don't know. It was just the way they filmed it. He just strokes it a little bit too slowly for my liking.
I thought it looks cool, but I see your point.
And then they immediately get their asses kicked.
Oh, it's not even
so funny.
Ooh, embarrassing.
It's not a contest at all. Yeah, the white wizard appears in this bright light and just immediately knocks them all back. Just not even a fight at all. And they're like, who are you? And then you hear, so what they did with the editing for this, they mixed Sir Christopher Lee's voice together with Ian McKellen's voice
okay.
for this introduction, so that there's a
I
bit
thought
more.
something sounded weird about it. It sounded a little too deep almost, or too gravelly.
Yeah, it sounds very much like Saruman, which is what they're, trying to set up, that like, oh, this is Saruman. But no, it's Gandalf. Aragorn's like, show yourself, who are you? And it's Gandalf.
This little exchange too, like where he beats them so quick. This is another instance where I feel missed opportunity, because it's like they set up the power of these two wizards so much, we never get to see them fight.
Oh, believe me, I know.
That would have been so cool.
The only time we really see them use their magic is in that dumb fight in Fellowship of the Ring, where they're just throwing each other around them.
Practically fell asleep during that. Come on.
It's and then Gandalf just uses his wizard staff to hit people with for the rest of the movie.
Yep. The video games are way more fun with Gandalf. You get to do really cool stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what magic Gandalf can do because he barely uses it. So
it's a pretty soft magic system, that's for sure.
And there's this look in Aragorn's eyes and this expression that he has when he's like, Gandalf, but you're dead, where he's like, because behind him, Legolas and Gimli have bowed, but Aragorn is still standing up straight. And I just love this moment because, like, in that one instance, you see that he is still grieving the loss of Gandalf. And so he, like, can't let himself believe that Gandalf is back and in front of him alive.
Very heavy Bible like connection here. Like clearly riffing off of like when Jesus appears to the disciples, you have the one doubter, you have the two, like very, very strong undertones of that, especially with the light too. Cause it's like, they're kind of like, whoa, and it's like so heavenly, and definitely not a stretch to say that's kind of what was, trying to be communicated here.
Oh, for sure. Gandalf explains what happened and talks about how he defeated the Balrog, and then he says the phrase, I strayed out of thought and time, which is how I feel right now. As we're recording, where we're in a post-election day but pre-results world.
Well, I was gonna link it to COVID of just like,
oh, that too.
It's like, it's only been a few days but it's felt like a lifetime of,
Yeah. He talks about how like he was brought back as Gandalf the White to serve another quest, basically.
By who and how? Who cares?
We don't. Yeah, it's again just a vague, unexplained magic system. Yeah,
there's
is what it is.
Some very vague sense I get from the books and movies where it's like there's like a darkness and there's like a cosmic light, and there's sort of like the god and evil of this, and it's like a weird merging I see of like yin and yang, like Eastern philosophy, and then also like Christian religion. It's a kind of a mix, I think, because they imply that like the two sides sort of need each other, but at the same time, one is clearly evil, one is clearly bad. I don't know, my 2 cents.
Yeah, and so the next thing, they go out of
wait,
the forest.
Before we get to Shadowfax, he forgets his name,
right?
Which makes no sense. Plot hole. I don't know necessarily that he forgets his name, but it's because we have to set up that, because they say like Gimli says Gandalf, and he's like, Gandalf? Oh no, I am not Gandalf the Grey anymore. I am Gandalf the White. Well, the scene sort of implies, right, that this is the first time he's heard his name in forever. But hold on, he was just with the hobbits. Did they not call him Gandalf at any point?
Look, I'm with you there that basically nothing about how Gandalf came back to be makes sense. None of it is
He loves
explained.
drama. That's what it is. He's like, he did that for real with Pippin and Merry. He was like, oh, Gandalf the Grey. And then with them, he's like, I got to do it again. I can't just give them the, second hit sloppy seconds. Come on.
And then, so then they leave the forest, and Gandalf like sings and whistles for Shadowfax.
Shadowfax coming in hot.
Comes out, and it kind of just looks like a tampon commercial for a bit.
It's like either that or like the cover of like an erotic romance novel.
Yes. of just Shadowfax running through fields. And this is another instance I'll point to when people are like, how is Two Towers? How are the Lord of the Rings movies so long? It's because they have a full 2-minute scene for Shadowfax.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Which I'm not exactly complaining about, because the horses and Shadowfax in particular are such a big part of the books that like this moment is them paying, homage to that part of the books.
That's
so
true.
I appreciate that.
I will just say, as we're kind of wrapping up here with this segment. I know you said you really like these scenes. These are great scenes. It's a great movie, but I also did like one of the little flaws. It's like a minor flaw that I have with Lord of the Rings in general, as told by Peter Jackson, is that he uses certain like filmmaking shortcuts to communicate emotion. He doesn't do it all the time, but he does it with this stuff. It's like, this is important because this is slow motion, even though that just looks like a regular horse. It's like, this is important because like this character dying is important, even though you barely know them, because the music swells up. And there's a lot of like emotional manipulation he does here. It's not inherently a bad thing, but it is a little teensy bit lazy sometimes.
It was very heavy-handed in Fellowship. There were like 2 or 3 moments where a character would be speaking and would be like, this will either bring about the ruin of all, and then it would cut to Boromir. Or we shall restore hope, and then it would like cut to Sam, who is the representation of hope.
Gee, I wonder if that's intentional. yeah. Like Grima Wormtongue again. It's like, of course
they're not leaving anything up to the interpretation of the audience. They're like making sure you get it right off the bat.
Which is slightly a bit of a betrayal to Tolkien in some ways, I would say, because reading those books, as I'm sure as you remember, he was one of the most important. He is the most important fantasy writer of all time. And one of the reasons is because it's not just that he invented so many staples of the genre or popularized a lot of tropes. It's because he was able to prove to a really snobby elite class of novelists at the time and critics that you can have genre fiction be deep, and you can have amazing writers like Tolkien write these stories and have beautiful prose and be able to just at random moments just write about like a fox, like running into a meadow and stuff like that. Just proves that there can be more to this, and that's where we are now. And that's why I feel a little bit like, Peter Jackson, take some notes, man. Like, you don't have to. I hate to say that it's not representative of the whole movie, obviously, or the movies. He does a great job with them overall, but I get a little feisty.
No, you're totally, that is just so accurate. Yeah, so Shadowfax comes out. Gandalf is like, that's the Lord of the Horses, and neglects to mention that he actually, in the books, he stole Shadowfax from Rohan. And that is why when Gandalf goes to Rohan, that's really why everyone in Rohan and Theoden and everyone is mad to see him.
Yeah.
Because he stole their most precious horse. And that's just a fact that they just didn't put in the movies at all.
Which is kind of weird. They could have.
Because it makes me laugh so much, because in the first movie, Frodo says, like, they're calling you a disturber of the peace. That's exactly what Gandalf is. And he stole their horse. And it's just like, oh yeah, he's mine now. It's like, no, you stole him.
I like edgy Gandalf though. I think that's what's effective about the books is like, you don't get this sort of like, Sunday school cookie cutter Gandalf who's like pure of heart and everything. You get like the really like wise, I guess Fellowship does it pretty well, but like the wisecracking kind of impish Gandalf,
rascally.
which is super fun. And makes more sense that a person with that much power wouldn't be that reliably good, like he comes through in a pinch, but at the same time, like, he's not a perfect person. I guess Gandalf the White's a different story, but
yeah. And then the 4 of them ride off to Rohan, and that is where we are going to end this section of the movie. And remember at the beginning when I was like, oh, I think I've divided the movie up into more manageable chunks for discussion.
Surely if I invite John Negroni on, it'll be a concise stay on track.
All of the other recordings have gone 2 hours every time, and I'm like, great, I guess now I have to go again for like the 4th time and re-divide up the movies into maybe half-hour segments.
It's only gonna get worse though, because these scenes are just gonna get more and more dense. So,
The other thing is that like Return of the King is going to go on for like 3 months if I do it by half-hour segment. So I don't know, whatever. It's fine. That's a problem for future me. Present me right now is going to say, John, thank you for coming on and discussing Two Towers.
thanks for
What would
inviting
you
me.
like to plug, and where can people find you on the internet?
I'd like to plug my charger into my iPad so I can finish the Two Towers. You can listen to me on my podcast talk about newer movies on Cinemaholics. Although on Cinemaholics, we do have Extra Milestone, which we talk about old movies as well. Lots of fun ones. I'm not on all of those, but we have Sam Noland, who hosts the Extra Milestone podcast, and Samwise Gamgee is like his favorite fictional character from these movies. Like literally the first time I emailed Sam, because he was a listener of a podcast I used to do, his profile picture was Sam, the not so brave, and it's a fun little connection there. I know he really loves those movies, but yeah, Cinemaholics, you can find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all that stuff.
That's What I'm Tolkien About is a proud member of WBNE. You can learn more about the network by going to WBNE.org, where you will find all of our other shows like Hello from Elsewhere.
Do you find yourself thinking deeply about pop culture?
Do you wish for a super nerdy podcast that explores your favorite movies and books?
Well, look no further. From WBNE, it's Hello from Elsewhere.
On our podcast, we promise to literally transport you to all your favorite fictional settings.
I don't think we can actually promise that.
Yes, we can. Travel with us to the Death Star.
We can't put people in harm's way like that.
Or visit beautiful New Asgard.
That's so many plane tickets to Norway.
Explore the eras of Jane Austen or Frankenstein.
Metaphorically, we don't know how to implement time travel.
We do now on Hello from Elsewhere.
We're going to get in trouble with these promises.
With new episodes every other Friday, Hello from Elsewhere is available wherever you find your podcasts.
Yes, that part is true.
You can even listen on the Hogwarts Express.
Oh boy.
The cover is by Graphite, aka Vaishon Brandon. You can support him on Instagram at graphite.vmb. You can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram and on Facebook at Tolkien About Pod. Actually, you can't find it on Facebook at Tolkien About Pod, but if you search That's What I'm Tolkien About, the group should come up. You can find me on Twitter at MCWattsUp and Instagram at MCTurnedDownForWhat. And you can support the podcast on Patreon and become a patron. This week's sponsor is Matt. Matt, thank you so much for being a longtime and continued supporter of the podcast. Your support means a lot to me. What up? It's Mary Clay from the future. I forgot to say what we'll be covering next week. We will be picking up where we left off here. It's about minute 46, and we will be ending at Hour 1, 11 minutes and 53 seconds as Saruman is making the wargs in Isengard. And that is it. Thank you, John, for coming on. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
I want to echo that Vaishon is awesome because he's designing the cover of one of my new books, and I can't wait for you all to see it because it's super cool. Yeah, he's awesome.
I will 100% in the episode on the note that Vaishon is awesome, and that's what I'm talking about. By the way, did you know that when Aragorn kicks the helmet, Viggo Mortenson actually broke his toes, and that's the cape? By the way, did you know that Aragorn kicks the helmet? By the way, did you know that when Aragorn kicks the helmet, Viggo Mortenson actually broke his toes there, and that's the take that they kept in the movie?